And I'm Tavishi Rekhi. I'm the communications officer at EASPD. This training, we organized it for the EASPD Communications Network. I will explain very briefly what the network is. But before that, yeah, we have people from outside of the network today, but that's fine. You're really welcomed. And I'm just going to quickly share my screen and give you a overview of what the EASPD Communications Network is. Is my screen? I think you can see my screen.
Yes.
Yep.
All good.
Great. So, the Communications Network, it's basically our network of communications officers as well as people who are in charge of communications actually from our membership. So we are an umbrella organization and we are literally member run basically. So this is also a service for our members, and currently we have 33 people who are part of this network. It was started roughly around 2018, but we revamped it last year, and we're trying to make it a space for communications related trainings, and also, for example, this one, which is on PPTs and storytelling through PPTs. And we also want to make it a bit like a knowledge sharing space where we can, as people in charge of communications, come together and discuss current trends in comms. So that's the idea of the network. And just to briefly overview of what we do at ESPD, our main communication goals. We mainly communicate through our social media, press releases, newsletters, and email campaigns. But we have mainly three goals with it. One is to make people or our members who join, they can use our European platforms to really represent and use their voices. So we can provide them with this platform, as a lot of our network has not just EU institutions, but also really important organizations and partners present in Brussels that are influential. And we give access to that, sorry, as well as a continuous flow of communication between us and our members. So to make sure that we're able to represent their voice through our platforms, we need to be in constant communication. And that's actually really important. And again, through our press releases, our newsletters, we try to keep that flow of communication going. And our third important thing is raising awareness on disability social services sector in Europe. So often we have organizations that are grassroots NGOs, and it's very normal, they're very busy. And we, through our newsletters, and again, like I mentioned, social media and press releases, try to keep them really up to date with what's happening in Brussels, what's happening in the policy area, and social services sector in general. That's all of about communications at ESPD. And that was about our network. And if this is, of course, open to only members of ESPD. So if you want to join, you can contact me. And if you're not a member, you can contact our memberships officer at ESPD to get to know how to become a member. And with that, this was all about, sorry, I'm just going to stop sharing. Yeah, this was about our communications network. And now I think we have enough participants, so we can start with the training. I would like to introduce you to Lauren Goodfellow, our trainer for today. She's from Bright Carbon, a senior comms consultant there. And Bright Carbon is an e-learning and a presentation agency. So this is right down their alley. And we will hopefully today learn some skills on how we can use our digital presentations as supporting material to when we present rather than an additional task. So Lauren, with that, on to you.
Great, thank you. Could you just allow screen sharing? Sorry, I don't have the power right now.
Yes, I'll just make you a co-host.
Okay, great.
There you go.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for the introduction. As Tavishi said, I am a senior comms consultant at Bright Carbon. Also outside of work, I'm a writer, and I'm a very much a book enthusiast. So hopefully I know a thing or two about storytelling. So basically today we're going to kind of cover why most presentations are really boring and how we can make them better by using storytelling techniques and also visuals. Speaking of visuals, I'm actually going to turn my camera off just because it can be a bit distracting sometimes. Feel free to do that yourself. I probably won't be able to see you just because I'll be looking at the presentation. So I'm just going to turn that off. Right, so we're going to start by going through some of the most common mistakes that are made when presenting, essentially. So there's three big things that we see. We've all sat through these bad presentations, and we want to make sure that we avoid these mistakes. The first one is when the presenter just talks about the features of a project or a service or their idea without actually telling you what the benefits are for you. The second mistake, and my least favorite, is when slides are just a bunch of bullet points. This is the majority of lectures that I sat through in university. And the third is the most common in scientific and data-led presentations that we see. And this is when you just throw everything you have at a presentation and hope that the audience can make sense of it. But we can look at these in a little bit more detail. So the features presentation is often seen in kind of corporate organizations. It's when the presentations themselves are long and rambling. And at the end, somebody realizes, oh, we should probably talk about the benefits of this. But because of all these features, you don't actually get the audience paying attention at this point. You've probably lost them after 3 or 4 slides, and then they don't see the benefits for them by the end of it. The second type of presentation is the bullet point hell. And if you're going into a meeting with slides that look more like documents, you're making life difficult for everybody in the room because people just can't resist trying to understand what's in front of them. And what happens is the audience tunes out the presenter and reads the text. It's not possible to listen and read at the same time, so the speaker can't make any impact until you've finished reading. See, I could have said anything there, even though I was reading off the screen. I could have said anything, and you probably would have been reading the words over listening to me. You've already read the slide at this point. You just want to move on. You don't actually want to hear more about it being blabbed on. So that means the presenter is either being ignored or being intensely irritating. The third type that we discussed was the content dump. So this is when you kind of put up very complex graphs or charts and you don't explain them too much, and it means that the audience are trying to figure out for themselves, and what this usually leads to is to them coming to the wrong conclusion, or they just tone out completely and start thinking about other things like what they're going to have for lunch. And that means no matter what you put on the slides, they're not going to be listening to you anymore, and they're not going to be hearing all of this important information that you've got to tell them. So those are the three most common mistakes. Does anybody have any questions? And if I can check the chat. If anybody has any questions, just shout out, or I can have a look in the chat. I'll give it a couple of minutes. Nope, no questions? Cool, can move on to the next bit. So we'll start thinking about how we can change this essentially and how we can do it better. So first, we'll start at the start with the effective opening of a presentation. But something to think about is who is the actual star of any presentation? Is it the presenter? Is it the solution that you're offering? Is it a feature of the solution? No, it's none of those things. It's actually the audience. The audience is your main character, which means that the audience needs to be the center of any presentation that you make. But who else is a key character in the story? Happy to take shout outs for this. So who else do you have to be thinking of when you're making a presentation? Pop it in the chat or shout out, whatever's better.
Let me break the ice. Yourself and your delivery?
Not quite. So if the audience is that is really important, but if the audience is important, who else is important to the audience, if that makes sense? I can just go on. It's the audience's audience. So it's not just, so if you're thinking, especially if you're coming from a charity sector, I would assume, is that you're giving a presentation to people who will then go and give that information to other people. So you have to not only think of your audience, but who your audience will then go and talk to after that. So when we're talking about bringing the audience in, one thing that is like a guaranteed way to dissuade people and bore people whilst you're presenting is using we language. It can be really, really tempting when you're making a presentation is to just talk about us, we, I, me, but this just leads to boredom and zoning out. So what you need to do is change that into you language, and that will bring the audience right into your story. So there's actually some research done on this by Reister and Peterson in a book called Conversations That Win the Complex Sale. And this explains the benefits of using language in this way. You phrasing helps you to sell in another way. When you use you phrasing, your prospect's unconscious mind tries out your solution as you describe what he can do with it. He is no longer a passive listener, but he's actively engaging with your ideas. You phrasing pulls your prospect into the story that you're telling, and once that happens, you actually get a measurable impact. So I've got another question. What is the point of every presentation? Like, what is the main goal of any presentation? Taking shout outs again.
I think quite often you want people to do something, or you're providing information. Again, you're wanting people to act on.
Yeah, I would say it's more the trying to make people do things, essentially. It's the persuading, right? So the informing people is kind of a means, not the end, but every presentation is about moving the audience from one place to another. And that other place could be like taking them from an old way of doing something to a new way of doing something. It could be getting everybody on board with the way that a team strategy is working. It could be persuading the audience that the content that you're teaching them about will help them to do their jobs better, or it could be the traditional selling them something. So what's interesting about this and tying it in with you language is that audiences are so much more likely, like twice as likely, to actually remember the content of a presentation if they see themselves in the presentation and they see the benefits to them as they're being told it. So what you need to do when you're presenting any kind of information, whether that be presenting to train, presenting to like inform, presenting to train, to sell something, you're always trying to connect the dots. You can't just assume that the audience is going to do that for you, because you might think it's obvious, but they might not see that. So you need to explicitly draw a clear line between the solution you're offering, the problem that they have, and the benefit that it can bring to them in the end. And that means they're much more likely to engage and remember what you have to offer them. But what is your job as the persuader? What is your biggest enemy, your biggest hurdle? Again, with the shout outs or the chat, whichever's easier.
Is it your audience just getting bored?
Not quite bored. It's more about changing them. So what stops people from changing, essentially? It's just inertia. Generally, people do not like change. It's really easy for an audience to stay where they are. So you've got to create stakes. This is a very big thing in storytelling. Whether it's a novel, a short story, or a presentation, there has to be stakes. So you have to show them that they're falling into this quicksand, and if they don't make a change, there's going to be problems. You need to create that kind of urgency. So the way that the approach that we use at Bright Carbon is we split this into two kind of parts. The first part is why change. So the first part's why change, and that means that you have to explain to them why they need to change the method in the first place. So, for example, we used the kettle example before on the slide previously. It's saying why they should be going from a hob kettle to an electric kettle, and this is explaining things like it's more energy efficient, it's quicker, it's easier to clean, anything like that. And then the next part is the why us. So that's where you start going into the brand of the kettle that you're selling. Obviously, this can also work for training. You could say like, oh, that this is the method that we currently use to onboard people. But this is why we should be using a new onboarding method because we need to change this, this, and this. And why we should use the training method that I'm suggesting is this, this, and this. So you can see that there's a kind of a gradual movement in the story. So like I said, this is where why change is where you're giving the different options, but you want to show them why the option that you're presenting is the best one. And then you get more specific in the why us section, and you talk about why out of all of the different ways you could do the new solution, why we should choose this one in particular. And so that means overall you take them from the old way to the new way that you are suggesting. So the first thing you want to identify is what is wrong with the approach that is currently being taken. What are the problems with it? You then have to identify why won't the other options work? Why is it only the option that you're suggesting that is the right way forward? And then you identify how that approach is actually different and how it stands out from the crowd and why it's better from everybody else. So we're actually going to do a little bit of an exercise now. If you don't have paper, that's fine. Just think about it. It's going to be, we'll take a little bit of a chance to share, but don't worry, I'm not going to force anybody if you don't want to. But we're going to focus on this why change, because sometimes it's a bit of a concept. So it's good to just actually put it in practice. So think about something that you've presented on recently. Think about something you were trying to persuade an audience to kind of get on board with, and write a few bullet points capturing this why change argument for a specific audience. So what I'd say first is like write down what the topic is, write down who your audience is, and write down what you're trying to persuade them to do, and then think about these different types of challenges. I'll give you, what time are we on now? I'll give you until past, so 7 minutes to do that, and then we'll come back together and chat about it. Feel free to pop questions in the chat or just shout out if you need my help on anything. Okay, I can give you another couple of minutes, or if anybody's ready to share now, let me know. Or just let me know if you need more time. Either way is fine, otherwise I'll just start picking on people. Would somebody be willing to share what what they were looking at, even if you don't want to share your actual result? Just think about what about that like initial thing of like who the audience was, what you're trying to persuade them to do.
Maybe I can start, and then that might encourage some people.
Open the floodgates.
So I picked an example of a few weeks ago. I had to go to a conference and speak about inclusive education for persons with disabilities. And there were policymakers, local authorities, and NGOs in the room. And so I was trying to encourage them to see inclusive education as a priority to work towards. And I tried to look at the sort of the people and why they'd want to change. So sort of for the people in the audience, maybe more generally from NGOs, it was more of how moving towards inclusive education can help bring a better education for everyone, potentially including their children or themselves. And then for policymakers, it was sort of looking at how to develop quality education is increasing the quality of education, and also the money factor sort of can be quite persuasive.
Yeah.
Policymakers.
Yeah, for sure. I think with that as well, you can at the beginning you can kind of say like how miserable the state of affairs is now. You could start the presentation by saying like this is how bad it is, like this many disabled children aren't satisfied with the education they're receiving, this many like people aren't actually able to access education in the way they should be able to. And if you start with those stakes, then you're like, okay, but you can change that. You can be a part of the change. And then they're a lot more likely to listen to what you've got to say next. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think sometimes or too often we can start from like a rights perspective that this is the right of people and so it has to be done, which obviously I think we can all agree that's the utmost importance. But as you say,
100%.
when you're persuading people, it's not so effective.
And if you think as well, like I always think this from a moral argument point of view, like if people don't already think that, it's hard to convince them that it's true. Unfortunately, it's really bad that is the case. But if you give, that's why you need to start with kind of like cold hard facts. And if you give more of a human touch to it, and if you give these like kind of evidence at the beginning saying this is how bad it is, people are like, oh, okay. And they actually tend to pay attention at that point because people don't really like to be moralized at. I don't think that's I don't think it's fair because I think that there definitely should be an approach where you can just tell people like this is the right thing to do and they're like, okay, yeah, I agree. But unfortunately that's not the world that we live in. So we have to use all of these tricks of the trade and use all of these kind of marketing techniques to our advantage to get these amazing things that you're wanting to lobby for and wanting to kind of raise awareness for. But yeah, no, that's a great example. Thank you.
So so when you're saying sort of telling this story at the start, that can be a combination of data and figures, and then also trying to bring in a human element. That's always ideal.
Yeah, so you could even boil it down to like using the example of one child or like one person, obviously like not a real person but as like a amalgamation, and use them as a as a kind of keystone for the data that you're then presenting.
Mhm.
And then if you show almost a story as you're going through this why change, and then you do the why us of like what or why this solution that I'm suggesting, you can then show the outcome that would occur if they were to adopt your strategy. So you can show them, it
Mhm.
sounds really like dire, but if you start at the beginning saying like this is how unhappy they are, but when we
Mhm.
then do all these changes that that we are suggesting, then at the end we can make this person happy and make them feel included and make them better educated and better able to
Mhm.
access
Mhm.
like normal life.
Yeah. I think we can do that quite well in our organizations as network organizations because you're often bringing in examples from across Europe. So you can sort of show, you could even follow a real life example of another country where maybe it's been done,
Yeah,
to
100%.
show like that actual impact.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really great suggestion.
Thanks. Okay.
Did anybody else have anything to share? Sandra, do you have your hand up?
Yes, yeah. So, sorry, can you hear me, please?
Yeah.
All right. So my name is Sandra, and I'm currently a student at the University of Zegen. But somewhere in the past years, around 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to work with the University of Zegen and then some two districts in Ghana. And there was a project that was going on, but I'll use this as a case study. And then who were a group of social workers and then health workers. So they were like staff of the district assembly.
Yeah.
And then the other group of targets were citizens that who lived in the communities around these districts. And what was the problem? The problem was that there was limited access to information from the side of the citizens about what the district assembly does. So it means that most of the services that were being provided by the district assemblies, most people were not able to access that. So the kind of approach that was taken was what could be done to actually bridge this gap in communication such that the citizens could access services that were being provided by the district assembly, targeting the social welfare department and then the health department better. So that was what I wrote down. I don't know if that makes kind of like answers the question, but that's what I placed down.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So what was the actual presentation that what were you trying to persuade? Were you trying to persuade them to change like
Yeah.
this accessibility? Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying them to actually adopt some kind of like not too high tech, but some form of like low
Digital.
tech, forms of communication that could make it accessible for people to access services from the district's assembly. For example, we're thinking of instead of people always walking in, why don't they kind of like make their contact numbers kind of like public, such that should people need information, they could easily kind of like just call in and then maybe access this information. Previously they had it, but not most people knew about the numbers because we did a research and not most people were aware of the numbers and not most people were also aware of the kind of services and then information that they could get from there, although they needed them.
That's a really great example because then you can your why change there is talking about those members of the community who aren't able to access these services easily, and it causes they're wasting time, they're wasting like resources
financial.
and so that's the why change at the beginning, and you've got all that. So that's your argument, that's your stakes.
Okay.
And then the next part is where you change and say, oh, but this is how we can fix that problem for you. So I think that's a really good example. And again, like we mentioned in the previous example, is that you could use the human element again. So you could use this is a person who's a member of this community, and you can kind of follow them as a journey throughout this process. And like this is how they start, and it's not good. And this is how what we're suggesting could change their life.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah.
No problem. Thank you.
Hello.
Does anybody else have anything to share, or shall I move on? Cool. I will move on. So we've talked about the why change, and now we've seen how you take your audience from kind of being unbothered, unpaying attention, and then take them each step along the journey to make them interested in what you've got to say and make them an advocate for this change. So this is where we then go on to the why us, and part of the why us is value propositions and benefits. So this is a big part of the presentation structure. And this is once you've moved past the why change, you move on to the why us. And to do that, you really need to understand who your audience is. Because the chances are is that you've by this point established your stakes, but you still haven't talked about exactly why your benefit is the right one to go. Your solution is the right one to go for, and why that benefits your audience the most, and why it does that more than the other options that are available. So the way that we suggest doing this is by using something we call value propositions. So these are statements that work best if they're a similar length or format. If one item is a single word, like efficient, and the next is standards compliant for accreditation within the private security industry, it looks a bit strange. So the best thing to do is use kind of terms that can work for each value proposition. So choose us because you get, or what, why should you switch to us? That way you keep everything nice and consistent, and each of the benefits relate to your audience. And it all looks nice and visually compelling, and it means that they're more likely to remember it as well. So these value proposition statements, we kind of use them to structure our presentations. So think of them like chapters in a novel. So you start with it at the beginning as your kind of table of contents, and then you scatter it throughout the presentation. Because realistically, if your audience can't remember anything about your presentation apart from these three things, then they remember enough. They remember the most important things. Because what you're going to do is kind of establish these value propositions, these three short, succinct reasons why your solution is the best one. And then you're going to have the proof points in between, like the chapters and the evidence for these benefits. And if that's all that your audience remembers, then that is still a large amount more than they'll remember of most presentations. We suggest usually using 3 to 5. I think 3 is actually the best number because it's the easiest to remember, but it depends on the length of your presentation. Any more than that, then it just gets a bit confusing. And only 1 or 2, then there's kind of not enough information there. So I'll show you some examples of value propositions that we've used in the past. So you've got things here like single supplier, more control, and greater value. And hopefully it's easy to see through these things of how they talk about the benefits to the audience here. Obviously, a single supplier is better because you're not having to talk to multiple vendors. More control is better because it means that you have more of a handle on whatever you're trying to achieve. And greater value, at the end of the day, a lot of things always come back to money and time. So if you're ever stuck for a value proposition, those are always good ones to fall back on. Got another example here that's more sciencey. So you've got scientific expertise, clinical relevance, and a flexible service. So again, just showing how those things are really succinct, really easy to remember, and they all sound kind of the same, which again, just for our lovely pattern recognition brains that we've all got as human beings, they really work well. So we can do a bit more of a deep dive onto benefits and talk about kind of the narrative on each slide. We've already semi-touched on this with the idea of the stories that you want to tell, but each slide should actually have this same narrative too. So they've got you've got to basically use this to keep your audience engaged, and this is like typical storytelling technique. So what you want to do first is have a huge low, bringing you down to a base of what is currently happening, and then show the high of what it could be. But the bigger the gap in between these 2 points, the more compelling your story or your argument is, and that actually makes people more likely to take the leap and follow your recommendations. So the structure that we suggest for this is starting problem. So that sets up the context and shows why this is something that people need to know and why they need to pay attention to it. It helps to frame the rest of the story. Next comes your solution, which is the details of what happens, or how something works. And the impact is the end result. This will often lead to the outcome that your audience will achieve by taking on your recommendation. So this is the structure for the entire presentation, but also slide by slide if you can manage it, or section by section if you're not able to do it on just one slide. So the ideal structure for a presentation is starting with a few slides on the why change and establishing the relevance. So you put that first because it helps the audience to see that they do need to do something different. Then the why this or the why us argument is the main event. This is the bit that convinces them to go with your recommendation above anybody else's. And this doesn't really count for anything if they're going to forget the whole thing in a couple of days' time. So we need to make the story memorable, right? This is where those value propositions come in again. You need to come up with these few key reasons why your solution is the best for the audience. And these are kind of, like I said, short and snappy points that are used to structure the presentation as you see here. I know that this can be a little bit confusing, so if anybody's got any questions before we go on a break, then just let me know, just shout out. And then if you don't have any questions, then we'll go for a break. I'll keep that nice little diagram up to show about the value propositions. Does anybody have any questions?
I don't see anything in the chat either right now.
No worries. Well, should we take a little break and then we'll come back at well, it's 2 o'clock my time, but 3 o'clock your time. I'm so bad with trying to figure out time differences on the fly.
It's a bit difficult, yeah.
Even when it's just an hour, can't add one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll come back at the top of the hour. Everybody go get a coffee,
Yes.
a tea, a snack.
Yeah, let's be back at 3 then, everyone.
Yeah, and if you've got any questions, feel free to just put them in the chat.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you.
you. Hello again. I hope everybody had a nice little break. I got myself a cup of tea and some chocolate eggs because I'm still eating my chocolate from Easter. Did anybody have any questions come up whilst it was percolating on your break, or are we all good to continue? Yeah, cool. We'll crack on. So the next thing that we're going to look at is clear interaction. So if you've noticed, as I've been doing this presentation, I've been doing a lot of clicks and there's been a lot of kind of animation going on. And there is a reason for that. And I'm hoping that you found it more engaging because I've been doing that. So the thing is with focus is it's actually, there's two different types of focus. So you've got this focused attention, which is about 8 seconds long. So think of like a party popper going off, think of a doorbell going. It's like maximum attention span, but it's very, very brief. You're completely focused on that thing for those 8 seconds, but once the stimulus is over, then you're no longer focused. But what we want for a presentation is sustained attention. So this is like around 20 minutes. I don't know if you guys have heard this before, but it tends to be about 20 minutes that people can focus without losing attention. And this is how we can read books or watch TV or listening to an interesting presentation. So we want to kind of grasp on that attention level and that sustained level of attention. So generally what happens is it goes like this. The beginning of the presentation, you're 100% committed, you're really interested, really intrigued of what they got to say. And as it goes on through this kind of 20-minute periods, you get less and less interested. You kind of start thinking about what you're going to have for dinner. Like, oh, did I feed the cat? Like, oh, it's a nice day outside, maybe I'll go for a walk. And then it gets to the end of that 20 minutes and you're like, oh crap, I really wasn't paying attention. Let's pay attention again. And you still never really get up to that 100%. But what you need to do as a presenter who's creating a presentation is provide stimuli across that 20-minute time period. You want to give little bumps of attention and things that give that kind of focus of attention to keep your audience engaged. So one of the things that can happen often in presentations is inattentional blindness. I don't know if anybody's heard of this before, but basically, inattentional blindness is where the visual perception will attempt to follow and match any aspects of the initial visual environment. But if an individual is asked to focus on a specific element within that visual environment, then they may suffer from this thing that we call inattentional blindness. And that means that if, say, I told you to concentrate on just one of these dots, say the yellow one in this corner, you might not actually realize that there's a new dot appearing because you're so focused on just one thing that's occurring on the screen that you can't see everything else that's happening. And then you've missed something important. So we're going to do an awareness test now. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just, wait, actually, I might have to, can you hear that?
No, we can't hear anything.
No, okay. I'm going to have to stop share and share again with sound. Give me 2 seconds. Go back to the beginning. Sorry about this. Advanced sharing options, not that one. Share with sound, there we go. Share. Okay, cool. Should be able to hear this now.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
Okay, just before it says it, what did everybody get for their answer? Shout out.
I got 13.
13.
Is that correct?
13.
Yeah. 13 is right. The Did anybody spot the moonwalking bear that was walking through whilst they were playing?
No.
No?
Mm-mm.
So, okay, I'll play it again.
This is an awareness test.
Let me just, yeah.
But did you see the moonwalking bear?
So this is exactly the same video, they're just playing.
Go!
Just watch the center of the screen. So he was there the whole time, but because you were focusing on the white team and how they were passing the ball, you just missed it completely. And the same thing is true for presentations. So this is something that you really need to think about when you're presenting a slide. So if new content appears on the slide, especially if it's not expected by the audience, it's possible that they'll miss that change completely. But there's two factors that can affect whether this new content is noticed, such as the color. If you just look over here in the yellow in the corner, if that changes color, that can be eye-catching and the audience are more likely to say it. But also the magnitude of the change, that helps too. But the most important thing for you as a presenter is actually announcing that change to the audience. So saying, oh, look at the yellow circle. That just kind of removes any possibility that they're going to miss it. So that's really important to kind of combat that inattentional blindness. So that was that's kind of focus and attention. Anybody got any questions on that before I move on? Cool. Going to visualization now. Visualization is my bread and butter. It's what I do mostly in my day-to-day job. So that is taking those bullet points that I talked about that I dislike so dearly and changing them into more engaging visuals. Again, like the presentation that you've seen today, it's very visual. There's not a lot of text on the slides, and hopefully that means that you find it more engaging. So we're going to kind of break down how we use visualization to tell a good story. So we've already talked about the problem with audiences, with the presenter just kind of talking over what the audience is seeing on the screen. You can actually read a lot quicker than a presenter can speak. So you're just going to tune out the presenter completely and you essentially become obsolete at that point. But there's actually studies as to why this is the case. So the audience actually retained more information from a presenter without any slides at all than a presenter with slides with lots of bullet points on it. It was noted that audiences were subconsciously assuming things that were written on the slides and thinking that they were more significant than what the presenter was saying. And because the audience couldn't listen and read at the same time, they were making a decision about which to engage with. So they chose what they perceived to be the more important of the two, and they chose the slides to the detriment of the presenter. So it's found that you could overcome this phenomenon by removing the text from the slides and replacing it with a few key images and keywords that don't wholly make sense by themselves. The graphics and visuals do the same thing. They effectively split the message between the narration and the slides. And doing this means that the audience can't choose to filter out one or the other. You have to listen to both at the same time and pay attention to both at the same time. So the problem is that the words that you see and the words that you hear are all actually processed in a single part of the brain. And this means that humans just can't read and listen at the same time, which leaves your audience confused, which isn't what you want in a presentation. But if you use visuals on your slides, which are processed in a different part of the brain, that leaves the audio part of your brain space to be able to process information too. So when you use these parts together, they can actually come together and form a much stronger and more vivid memory in the minds of your audience, helping them to remember what you've said and why it's important. And visuals have been used as a part of storytelling for since humans even began to exist. They go back centuries. Cave painting was one of the earliest forms that we have evidence of storytelling. wasn't just used for decoration, but it was actually used to portray meaning and give advice, and pass information down generations. Then you have the ancient Egyptians who mastered the art of hieroglyphs. They built a complex and nuanced method of recording and sharing information through these hieroglyphs. Even modern day Chinese characters, you can see their kind of visual and pictorial roots. I think there should be it. Yeah, so like the Chinese character for door looks like a door. The Chinese character for fire looked like fire, and the Chinese character for tree looks like a tree. So many of these, they're actual graphical illustrations of the meaning that they're trying to convey. So it's like a sort of shorthand that relies on common understanding to convey complex, sophisticated ideas in a beautiful and succinct way. And going even further than that, if you think of modern day emojis, these are just little pictures essentially. But they have the same basic idea of visual representations of a message, and they're a quicker, more intuitive, and somehow more human way of communicating. So now we've made the case of getting rid of bullet points. You've got to think, what do we replace it with? There is a certain school of thought that just says put in pretty pictures, like this one. I'm sure we can all agree it's a very pretty picture. But they actually don't add any value to your audience. And if we're placing the audience at the heart of how we develop our presentations, our slides need to develop how audiences actually learn. And we need to use our visuals in a way to help them actually understand the story better. You have to pick visuals that explain something really complicated and make it simpler. Using a pretty picture of a mountain or a waterfall doesn't help explain the complexity of, say, like disability education. And you also run the risk when you're using really nice photography throughout your presentation that doesn't really have any links, of again losing your audience. They might just start thinking about the next holiday that they're planning to go on, or the time that they went skiing in the Swiss Alps. So you've got to be really careful with that and make sure that it's relevant for your presentation. You don't want your visuals to just be decoration. They actually need to do some heavy lifting of the message. And this all goes back to what we were talking about before with linking the solution that you're trying to sell or kind of persuade people to buy into with the audience's problem. You have to use these visuals to explain to them how your solution can give them the benefits that they're after. So in this example, this person's selling tape. These people have a broken pencil, but they can fix the pencil. But you go even a step further than that, and this makes them realize that the benefit of this is that they're able to then write with that pencil as they weren't before. And then you could go even further than that and say this means they can communicate their own ideas. This means they can not forget to take their notes. That means that they'll save more time and they'll save resource. So there's always a so what that you need to be asking yourself when you're thinking about benefits. Like I said, a lot of the time it does come down to resource, value, money, time, because those are the things that really drive people to make change. Any more questions on that one? No worries. Okay, so we'll jump into layouts now. So with layouts, we can again talk about the kind of the text blocks that we often see in presentations and how we can turn that into more succinct things. So say that this is just a block of text about anything that you need to do. I'm sure that in your day-to-day jobs you write a lot of reports, and often those reports might need to get changed into presentations to kind of convey the information to a wider group. So what you want to do first is pick out the key information within that block of text. what I'd suggest doing is just doing this with a highlighter, or if you're working on paper, or if you're working in PowerPoint, you can literally like put the text up into like boxes with each sentence in a different box. And then once you've got your most important ones, you can organize that into a more succinct row. And this actually gives you a really good structure for your presentation, because you can use that as the kind of the chapter guide or the outline of your presentation. Often this looks like the value propositions that we were talking about before. And then you can go a step further than that and make these points visual. So this could be using photography or illustration. And again, it's not just putting in any old picture that you find on the internet. They should be relevant to your audience and to the story that you're trying to tell. Another way to do this, because sometimes photography can be a bit hard to find exactly what you're looking for, icons can be a really, really good way of communicating a message in a really easy visual way. And icons can be used across a range of different like languages and across a range of different audiences. And usually they're a very universal kind of way of communication, as we talked about before, with the different types of visual communication that has been used throughout the ages. But then we can go a step further than that actually, and think about how, like the way in which these icons or pictures or anything and how they're laid out can communicate messages to the audience. So let's just take a look at, like, take the icons away and look at these 5 circles. You might just think this is a very kind of, it's the first thing you would do. You'd line them up in a line with everything the same size across the slide. But what is this actually saying about the information? Again, like participation time. Shout out if you've got any ideas of what this says to you.
Sorry, are we just looking at the visual and then saying what we
Yeah,
think?
so what would you assume by what's the relationship between these 5 things by the way that they're laid out?
Well, I would automatically read or like look at them from left to right.
So it
for me,
suggests a chronology.
Yeah, like in chronological order. And then I would expect to, like, I don't know, see like the presenter explaining something one by one.
Yeah.
From left to right, perhaps showing a visual behind it, like behind the circle. Yeah.
What about the weighting of them? Like, are they all equally important? Is there like a hierarchy?
For me, I always focus when something's chronological, like in a presentation, I think I focus more on the beginning and the end. The middle is where like it's very easy to like lose me.
There is actually I can't remember what the actual word is, but basically there's a school of thought that says exactly that you should put your most important things at the beginning and the end, because they're the ones that people are most likely to pay attention to. It kind of goes back to that loop that I was showing before, that kind of the graph going from very much attention at the beginning, a bit of a dip in the middle, and more attention at the end. So that's a good point. It also kind of suggests that they're not linked. If that, I don't know if, because they're not, there's no connections between them. They're very distinct, like separate, distinct points. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, like this will be like the intro slide of showing the chapters.
Exactly, yeah. But that's a lot of information for literally just having 5 circles on a screen, right? So we then can play with this essentially. And play with the ways in which you can use layout to convey information without trying too hard. So if I then change these circles and put them in a circle like put them in like an organization like this, what does this say?
I mean, I know it's a circle, but I do see like a hierarchy there. Like I see it trickling from top to bottom.
Yeah, more so for sure. Almost
Mm,
like almost like a pyramid of like the
mm,
best and then to the bottom. Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Um, it also kind of shows that it's a complete group, that there's like no more room for anything else to fit in. So your audience is probably going to assume whatever you're showing here is complete, and that is just how it is. But then you can change the meaning again by drawing circles in between them like this. What does this suggest?
Like they're interconnected somehow.
Exactly, yeah. But like by one kind of
Yeah.
unifying concept. So for example, all of the people, this could be all of the different organizations that come under the EASPD Communications umbrella, but it's the EASPD that connects them in the middle, right? But then if you change those lines and make it a circle around it, what does that say?
They're linked to each other, but not by one thing. Or like,
It's like
Exactly.
yeah.
it's like more
Yeah,
like a
exactly.
cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so then the possibilities, as you can see, we're not really doing much to these circles, but it is changing the meaning quite drastically. You can then play around with the size. This kind of suggests a close relationship between the points, or you can show that they actually overlap with each other by using these kind of interconnected areas. But if we put them back into a line and higher one up, that suggests that hierarchy that you were talking about before, Kat. You would think that that one's the most important, right? And the same thing can happen if you make one of them bigger. That makes that one seem the most important. And then even more so, you can create a whole hierarchy by changing the relative size of each circle. You often see this kind of used in in population diagrams. So you'd see this over a map and show like, oh, there's 600,000 people here and there's only 10,000 people in this place, and you'd use the circles to indicate that kind of information. And it's a really, really good way to show that visually, and that people will understand it intuitively. But kind of if you've got them in a line at this point, it doesn't really make sense to keep them in this order. So then you can break them away from that line and spreading them out a little bit more. Like we said, it could be over a map or something like that. And then you don't even have to limit yourself to a 2D plane. You can use focus to bring one circle into attention, and make the other ones look less important. And we often see this we use masking on PowerPoint to do this, and it's actually really simple. You just use a semi-transparent like text box and use that to cover up the ones that you're no longer talking about, and use it to focus in on the ones that you want to see. So those are just some kind of different ways that you can use visualization. So you've got photography, iconography, you've got this idea of like layout and hierarchy. So we're going to do another little exercise, and we're going to look at visualization this time. So again, maybe using the same presentation or the same subject that you thought about before. We're just going to have a go and come up with some visualization ideas. So I want you to sketch out a simple representation of your audience's current situation or their problem, and then also visualize how your solution can change or fix the situation, and then talk about find a way to visually show the benefits as well. So you've got that problem, solution, benefit structure that we've talked about, but you want to find like a simple visualization for each one of these. Obviously, this is better if you've got some pen or paper, or just open up a blank PowerPoint and have a play around with it. Again, I'll give you about 10 minutes, but if that's not enough time, you can just let me know. So 10 minutes, have a go at that, and if you've got any questions, just shout, I'll be here. How's everyone getting on? Do you need a few more minutes?
I think maybe we're good. The people done.
Sure. Well, Rachel, since you're already unmuted, you dug yourself into that, sorry.
Damn it. I'm not, well, mine was very simplistic, so maybe that's why it didn't take me very long. I stuck
go
with
for it.
the example of inclusive education. I don't think it's called one. I have the top one. I have my little stick figures, and you can see people over here who are together and happy. And there's
Yep.
this one person who's not included, and so they're separate and they're sad.
Yep.
And then my solution changes that, and they're all together and they're all happy.
What's the solution? You haven't visualized the solution in the middle there. You've skipped out the middle
It's
bit.
inclusion. They're together. And
Yeah.
so
What else could show? Because I would try and make it a little bit more distinct between each of the points. Just because it's like we said, there's that like process of going from the beginning to the end.
yeah.
And if you were making a presentation, you wouldn't just be saying, "Oh yeah, they're sad and now they're happy." It would be
Yeah.
there'd be more things in between there. So what in your solutions do you actually need to visualize? Like, what are the inclusivity kind of initiatives that you would be suggesting?
You could maybe have, they need like access to training. So maybe you could have sort of a visualization of training.
So like if you're
need-
going on the icon route, you could just use like a little mortarboard, something like that, or like block and pencil.
Yeah. You need sort of cooperation between different stakeholders. So maybe you'd have like speech bubbles or
Handshake.
handshake is what I was gonna go for. Access to resources. I'd hesitate about having like a money bag though, because I think that's maybe a bit too simplistic, but maybe some example like technology or something like that.
Or just something that shows like expansion, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like growing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I like it. Good idea. Anybody else got any that they wanted to discuss with the group? Or just as me? It's free consultancy time, guys. Use it whilst I'm here.
Okay, well, my sketches are really bad.
No, don't worry, Kat. So are mine. The designers in our company have a lot to work with.
Okay, so I stuck with the circles, and my the presentation that I was thinking of was the issue is that a lot of universities are removing remote learning post pandemic. So hybrid classrooms are no longer available, like in prominent universities. So only like this is my first slide for the current situation. Wait, hold on, let me remove the blur function. So this is so I will present this as the potential students that a university would have, and then pretend this is a light bulb. This is the center of knowledge, and then they're only reaching like a certain amount of students. So this is where I would use like the transparent, like the masking technique here. And then the solution would be for them to be able to like expand to these students via like technology, making their classrooms hybrid, having remote learning opportunities. So that's like the solution. And then this would be the end result where these students are reached and they are able to do remote learning. And then that would also lead to perhaps like their own, like another center of knowledge as well. So there's like a growth of knowledge, there's a growth of outreach. So it's just multiple types of benefits, but it's very simplistic.
It works really well though. I really like that. If you're thinking as well with I'm just thinking taking it one step further than that as well, because I think what you've got is really great. But what's the so what? Like what's obviously it's great for the students if they have more access, but what is it that the university gets by implementing those things?
Okay, so then seeing that possibly like linking the two centers of knowledge then perhaps, and then getting a return on investment via more research, a bigger untapped potential with their students.
They're likely to get more
I think
students
like,
as well, right? Like if they have a good
yeah,
reputation for hybrid learning. And that's the best thing about inclusivity, is that it brings more people on board, and ultimately they get paid per head. So they make more money if you're more inclusive.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think that's always the thing, is just remember, like, to bring it back to value, like whatever that value is, whether it's monetary, time, or resources, always try and link it to that in whatever way you can, and like spell that out very directly. Because that is what ultimately at the end of the day they care about, is their bottom line, especially with something like universities, because they are a business.
Okay.
And if you're basically telling them like, this is a way for you to get more money and more investment and things like that, then they've got no choice but to think, oh yeah, this is a great idea, we should be doing that.
Thank you.
Cool. Anybody else?
Maybe I could just jump in very quickly. So my name is Konrad Meissner. Nice to meet you. I'm an educator at the University of Siegen, and I'm dealing with innovation in social services. And I was wondering right now how to address things to students. So what I thought about, because we did some studies, is that we can find to some degree, right now, I don't know if you can see it. I don't think so. Let me just check the blur.
Maybe just turn the blur off.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So we've got an assessment of problems that we're currently finding in the different fields, which would be one, and then by a 3-step program, so 3 different lectures, meaning theory, practice, and then transfer, we would like to lower the problems in the fields. And I'm wondering how to tackle the problem of over or under exaggeration of data and extrapolation of this data to persuade students, for example, to engage in the course. So is there some way to find out if I'm over or under exaggerating with my visualizations?
So I would say if you're representing it as a graph, if you're representing it graphically, then you need to be specific. You should be mathematically correct, because you don't want to be misleading, because that's just not fair. But the beauty of using a visualization and using something a bit more metaphorical means that you can't really over or under exaggerate. So you said what is the problem that you're trying to get the students to understand? Like that they're not engaging enough with the course. Is that it?
So the idea is that in the fields currently we can find a lot of cost pressure, for example, or bureaucracy, shortage in stuff. And by doing some innovative new ideas within the services, we could potentially tackle those. And what I found as a business administrator by training is that at least my students here have a problem in engaging, for example, mathematical issues or calculations. And what I want to tell them is by dealing with innovative stuff, by thinking it through, for example, also by calculating the costs that are behind that, they could have a different perspective onto their day-to-day business and social services. And yeah, basically over time, when more people would apply those principles in the thinking, could deal with, as I said, for example, with staff shortage or cost pressure and so on. So potentially, yeah, answering those issues and lowering the impact.
So that's the kind of the outcome and the benefit at the end, is that lowering the impact of these problems. So the problem that you want to identify. So this is where I'm getting a bit confused, sorry, is about are you presenting this information to students or to staff? Because if you're talking about like low staff problems and things like that, I think the messaging is getting a little bit mixed. So you want to, forgive me if I'm wrong, but the way that I'm seeing this is that right now there's a problem with like shortage of staff, for example. Let's use that one. And is the problem with that the students then aren't engaged or they're not able to engage?
Well, that will be something that they are dealing day to day with. So what the students told me, at least, these are some of the major issues that they find whenever they are working. So a lot of our students are at the same time working already in social services and doing their bachelor's or master's degree.
Right.
And what I want to tell them is that basically by applying those principles, they could deal better with that.
Yeah, so I think that would be a good place to start, is to say like but I take it a step further rather than just saying like, oh, there's staff shortages. I'd say like, and how this affects you is that there's like you're experiencing burnout, you're experiencing too much time wasted, you're experiencing that like you don't have it's hard to balance time between your studies and your work, right? So that's the actual that's the effect that these issues are having on them. And then you can talk about your solution, and you can talk about the way in which what these kind of methods that you're showing them, and how they can change the way that they're interacting in this kind of environment. And then that's at the end you say, and then you'll feel less burnt out, you'll have more time, you'll have more balance, and you'll feel like more at peace with your situation. Does that make sense in that kind of storyline?
Absolutely. I was just wondering whether using graphs in this regard, so telling them, okay, here is the current status, the status quo with according to empirical data that I have found, and this is where it could be potentially after the course, it is fitting in this regard, because I have an issue with extrapolating the data to this degree.
I would personally, as somebody who clearly loves visualization, I would move away from the graphs. Graphs can be really useful if you've got, I would say, for like scientific things where you have to show like very precise information. But I think what you're trying to set up there, the story can be told through iconography, through illustration, and through more of a story rather than just those graphs. So you could start so like an example of this is like, for your problem, you could show like somebody who's looking really stressed and burnt out in a photograph, and be like, this is you currently, this is the situation that you're dealing with. Then you talk about your solution and like the benefits that offers to them, and at the end you show someone who's more happy, more relaxed, somebody who has time to do hobbies and balance their work and their life. Do you see what I mean? So you make it more of a personalized story, rather than, because I think a lot of the time, if you're throwing graphs at people, especially people who aren't naturally scientists, they can just turn off. I know I get like that, and I did a science degree, I did biomed, and I see a graph and I cry. Like I'm not a big fan of them. So I think the more personalized and the more of a human aspect, especially when you're talking about things like social services, the much more engaged your audience is going to be.
All right, thank you very much. I will just take a step back from my researcher being in this regard, I think.
No
Thanks.
problem. You can definitely use it as evidence, I would say. Like, use it to back up the points of your solution, but don't make that the main story. Use it as kind of jewelry to the story rather than as the main event.
Perfect, thank you.
No problem. Anybody else? Nope. It actually takes me and let me just minimize the video there. That takes me on nicely to the next bit, because we're gonna start talking about graphs and charts. So thanks for that, Conrad. Yeah, so as I was saying, graphs are a great tool to use in presentations because they can help your audience to understand data, and they're actually far easier to understand than number-heavy tables or bullet points. But there are very many different types of graph, and not all of them are going to work to help tell your story. You need to choose the right graph that represents your data in the best way and makes it easiest for your audience to understand what's going on. So I'm going to go through a few different problems that you can see in graphs. So a big one is using kind of overly complex graphs. So something like this, and when I was saying I look at a graph and cry, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, because it's really difficult to understand what's going on. There's not much differentiation between all of the lines. It would take me a good 10 minutes to even try and understand what was happening here. Another problem that you often see with graphs is that you'll throw like a million different graphs onto a screen, and it just causes confusion because everything's really small and it's really difficult to see, and there's so much information that like trying to relate that to what the presenter is saying is not easy. Another big problem, ironically, that we see is small text, and you've got no way of knowing which data point is which and which ones are important. Vertical text like this, I would also try and avoid. It's much harder to read, and it means that your audience will struggle to interpret what it actually says. So legends are really important for graphs, but make sure that your audience doesn't have to look back and forth between the legend and the data to kind of match the categories. It actually makes it difficult to differentiate one information point from the next, and can lead to all sort of confusion, and just it's a bit of a pain in the neck. Our advice is to use labels instead of a specific legend. So this means that your audience can look directly at the data and immediately understand what it is. And this actually works the same way with all types of graphs. It's not just pie charts. It's all about ensuring that your audience is able to identify and therefore understand the information a bit more easily. So let's compare two different charts. They look reasonably similar, but they've actually been created in different ways. One of them is what we call a live chart. So this is using the built-in live PowerPoint chart functions. The colors and formatting have changed, and we've added animations so that we can tell the story of this data. But fundamentally, this is based on a standard bar chart template in PowerPoint. This second chart is what we call a non-live chart, meaning that it has been created completely from scratch using auto shapes and lines. Again, we've formatted it and added animation, but it's basically just a collection of colored boxes. The difference between them is that sitting behind this live chart is a data spreadsheet. It's automatically created by Office when you make this graph. As I'm sure you are aware already, you just plug in your values and the chart's created automatically, meaning that it's less work for you, but there's kind of pluses and minuses of both methods, and we'll go through those. So the good part of the live graphs, as we said, it's very accurate. I mentioned that before with Conrad, that if you're using graphical representation, it's really important to be accurate because you don't want to mislead your audience. It's also easy to edit because you can just change the data points, and that means that the graph will change, but it's not so easy to format. So this is actually something that we have in our thing called Bright Slides. It's a free PowerPoint plugin, but we have accessibility checkers. So when we're talking about accessibility and disability awareness and things like that, obviously there's color contrast checkers that are really important to be aware of. And in Brightslide, we have this built in. So you can check if the color contrast of your presentation is good or not. But if you're using a live chart and it's not built into your actual the kind of color palette within your PowerPoint deck, it's not so easy to change the format of these charts. Whereas with a non-live chart, you can be a bit more flexible. You can be more visual with it as well and make it a bit different, but it is a lot harder to be precise with this. And it depends on what information that you're kind of portraying, but especially if you're showing like scientific data, it is very important to be precise. But we're going to show you some examples of like some fun things that you can do with live charts that you might not of non-live charts that you might not have thought of before. So here's an example. So this is a running tracker. It's showing like who won the race. And it shows very easily how close other people were to winning. And I think this is a really good example of a non-live chart. It is essentially just a bar chart, but I think adding that information of the visual, like the visual of the running track, makes it really easy to understand what it's trying to say, and it's really easy to see who the winner was in this competition. Another one is using again the masks and the images. So you've got this idea of an iceberg. This is a really good one because you're saying the hidden cost of an office move, and everybody knows that icebergs are bigger underneath. So your audience is expecting you to click and reveal these other sections. So here we've got 40% rent, 30% office fit out, 15% utility costs, 10% property taxes, and 5% branding. And you can make those sections like accurate to show that they're split up in certain ways. Another one is like an infographic type of chart. This one is really effective in my eyes. I find this one great. So this is showing that 70% of plants and animals live in forests. 24% of these cut down by logging and urbanization. 13% of this is removed by unintentional forest fire, and 12% palm oil plantation. 5% for fields for grazing. And I think this is a really, really good example because it shows the impact, but it's also graphically precise. So you've got it taking up these certain amounts of area, and it shows really easily with like only a glance what are the biggest problems, what are the biggest removals of these of this habitat. You can go a little bit more simple, so we can use the icons that we were discussing before, and you can use that as these kind of simple pie charts and put the icons in the middle that represent the points that you're trying to make. So you've got drowsiness, stomach ache, skin sensitivity, and intestinal pain. And using these kind of half filled in circles or 60% filled in circles, and showing the different percentage, I feel like it's a really, really easy way to get across the idea of percentages quickly, and make it very easy for the audience to understand. So we'll go from kind of the beginning. So if you've got this is very relevant when we talk about the pandemic, but say we've got a table that shows the rate of infection. Has anybody got any ideas of what you could use to visualize this graph?
I was going to say circles, but I'm not sure how you would maybe show the days with that.
What would you put in the circles?
I'd have them at like different sizes depending on the number of cases.
That could work. Is there like a specific icon that you could put in the circles maybe?
Maybe. People, I suppose. Maybe people.
People. There we go.
Yeah.
People. Yeah. So people is a really good way, and I think it's again going back to that idea of the humanity of it, right? And that storytelling element. And anything you can add a human element to, you're talking to humans, and they want to hear about humans, and they'll be more engaged when there's a human involved. So I would recommend using people wherever you can. So using that people icon, you can start with day 1, day 7, day 14, day 21, and day 28. So that shows exactly the same information that we just went over, but in a much more graphical way. And it's exactly what you said, Rachel, is like using the size. But I think adding the people as well just gives it that little extra zhuzh, and makes it a little bit easier to understand at a glance what it's talking about. So we're actually going to talk about animation as well. So graphs can be boring. We all know this. And if the graph is static on a slide, it reveals all of the information that the presenter is going to talk about in one go right at the beginning. This means that it's also difficult to interpret and causes the audience to disengage from what you're saying, which means that they can't listen to the story behind the data. But the best way to animate a graph on a slide in order to tell a story is to start just by bringing in the axis of your graph. This lets you introduce the information that they're about to see and allows your audience to get a bearing on what they will be looking at when you bring the data points in. Then show the data points using animation clicks to bring the data series or categories in one by one or in groups that work together. You don't need to bring the data in order, but instead use the animation to show new points to best help tell the story. Using animation also allows you to focus on particular differences between data, highlighting certain aspects of the graph to reinforce a point or to provide a punchline for your story. Okay, I've kind of covered all of the kind of theory and content that I was going to cover today. But I'm absolutely happy to take questions. This is just our little bright carbon screen of what we can offer. And we also, as I mentioned, have a completely free PowerPoint add-in called Bright Slides. I would recommend anybody who is working on PowerPoint regularly download Brightslide. It is the best thing. Like, I'm not even saying this as somebody who works for this company, but I wish I'd had it in like university. I wish I'd had it in school. I wish I'd had it in my other jobs, because it just makes PowerPoint so much easier to use. And it basically gives you every single tool that you wish PowerPoint had. You get it through this add-in. And it also includes, as I said, like accessibility checking tools such as contrast checkers and things like that, which can be super, super useful when you're creating accessible presentations. Yeah, so that is me in terms of the theory. But if anybody has any questions, please just fire them my way.
I don't see any questions in the chat yet. If anyone wants to put it in the chat, please go ahead.
Yeah, or just shout out. We can use we've got a little bit of extra time. Some of the kind of the workshopping didn't last as long as I expected, so we've kind of sped ahead through it all. But if you got any more questions that you'd want to pose to me, if there's any kind of questions about certain presentations that you've got coming up, I'm happy to help.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. It was interesting. It's good to get. Sometimes there's small things that you hear about. It's always good to have the reminder and bring it together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, different presentations.
Yeah, it was also really nice to see that your whole PPT didn't really have too much text, so it was really really implemented it. So yeah.
And it's still easy to follow, right?
I think it relies a lot also then on your strength as a speaker. A lot of people, your PowerPoint is like your safety net, and you have the points there is probably in reality more for you than from the audience, as sort of
You've
alluded to at
completely
the
hit the nail
start.
on the head. Yep,
Yeah.
it is 100% more for you than it is for the audience. Like
Yeah.
the audience doesn't need that. As I said, with that kind of the research that's been done, it's actually they'd rather have no slides at all than bad slides with loads of text on it, because it just makes it hard to figure out what you're meant to be paying attention to. And I totally agree with the idea that it's harder. It is harder. I definitely know that. And like it might not seem that, because I probably seem quite a confident presenter now, but when I first started this job, I really, really wasn't. And it was just through practice and trying out these different types of presentation techniques and just getting really comfortable with the content. I think that's the most important thing if you want presentation tips, is practice, and also just realizing that you're the expert when you're presenting on these things. You're doing it and you're standing up there for a reason, because you know about it and you've got something to teach those people that you're talking to. And I think that really changed it in my mind. That I used to get really nervous before presenting, whereas now I'm like, oh no, I'm helping people. And I'm assuming that because you're all in these jobs, you like to help people. So that might help to frame it that way a little bit.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have to unlearn what I learned at school about having bullet points and yeah.
Yeah, I have a bone to pick with ICT teachers. Like, but my uni lecturers were so bad for it. Like, yeah, it would all just be bullet points. Which
Yeah.
was fine when I was doing hybrid learning, if we want to go back to that. Because I was just learning off the screen and I wouldn't listen to them. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's definitely better to need the presenter, because you don't want to make you as the presenter irrelevant, essentially.
Yeah.
And how long would you say it takes to create a presentation like this with like the animations and to make it, accessible and everything?
So I think it really, really depends. Like, saying how long's a presentation is kind of the same as saying how long's a piece of string, like it depends on the context, who you're presenting to, and things like that. But I think, so obviously the version that I was presenting there, that was done by our designers. They're PowerPoint wizards, and it all looks very flash. I probably couldn't make anything that looks quite that good myself, but it's actually so easy to make like attractive presentations. Like, it's easier than you'd imagine. And I think if you just play around with kind of PowerPoint shapes, you can make a lot. Like, as we're saying, just with those plain circles, and all you've got was 5 circles on the screen, but moving them about and changing the order and changing the size, which are all really easy to do, that can convey so much information. So if you think about it in that way, you can really you can do a lot with a little, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions or remarks?
If you don't mind as well, I've actually I've got a little feedback form, if that's okay. If I can
Yes.
share that I'll pop that in the chat.
Yes, I'll also send it through in a follow-up email to all the participants. Yeah, so you get a good response.
That would be great.
Okay.
I've also got there's a section on the bottom there for any of the follow-up questions that people may have. I'll also just pop my email into the chat so that if anybody has any follow-up questions that they didn't want to ask in front of everybody, they can just send it through to me. Just seeing, checking I've spelled my name right.
All right, perfect.
Any last minute things? Because I know we whizzed through a little bit there, but is everybody happy?
Yeah,
I'm
it
sure
was
we've all
really
learned
interesting.
something.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm really glad that you've got some benefit out of it. And like I said, if you've got any questions, just give me a shout.
Thanks so much, Lauren, for spending
No
time
problem.
in the training. And thank you
Absolutely
all
fine.
for attending. Have
Thank
a
you very
nice
much.
Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks
a
so
lot.
much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.